In the beginning is the One. Every cult, every culture is a refraction of the One. There have been 10,000 cults, 10,000 cultures, 10,000 languages. In human history, 95% of them are now extinct. I think it's safe to say, based on historical precedent, that if you are in a cult, in a culture, that 10,000 years from now, it will be radically transformed and almost unrecognizable, or it will be dead and replaced with a more efficient cult, with a more efficient pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being than the status quo. Now, the One is refracted into numbers, which is one form of the system. The number system is arbitrary. Do you have a 3-point number system, and then after 3 you repeat and repeat? Well, then you get longer variations like that. One of the reasons computer codes are so long is because there's so many zeros and ones to make every distinction. So if you have a binary system of numbers, then you have to do many more combinations of zeros and ones in order to communicate anything. On the other hand, you could have a 1,000-point number system. Rather than just going to 10 and then repeating itself, you could have 1,000. So this is arbitrary, meaning you can cut the one, you can cut the circle into as many nuances as you wish, as your mathematical culture. And you can cut the circle into as many words as you want, as many distinctions as you want. And each word takes us to a point within the infinite continuum, a point that does not exist until it is created by language. Without language, without a number, it is simply the vast and uninterrupted ecology. Now, the basis for any culture is a promise. The culture promises that if you take the unconscious, the uninterrupted whole, and refract it in a certain way, if you will copy us, become like us, your human needs will be met. Your survival will go up. Your security of survival will increase. Your sense of love and belonging, your ability to meet your most fundamental human needs will go up if you follow the pattern. You could say the law is the pattern established by the majority of power in a dictatorship or the majority of people in a democracy. But the law is the established norm. As you go outside of the law, you receive the curse of your cult. If you stay within the pattern, you receive the blessing of your cult. And your prize for giving up so much flexibility is an unthinking normalcy. It takes very little thought to do exactly what your parents did, who did exactly what their parents did. All the thought is required in the deviation, in the evolution of the pattern. To just do what you've always done because you've always done it. It conserves energy in thought, but as it grows asynchronous with the ever-evolving reality, it becomes more costly in waste, right? If you just use a horse and buggy because that's the way you did it before, you don't require any thought, you just copy. But it becomes more and more costly in time as the surrounding environment evolves. So the simple version of a cult, of a culture, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that is recognizable because of its conformity. How can you recognize a German cult or an American cult or a Tasmanian cult? How can you recognize that group if certain regular patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being are not exhibited? The accent in the voice, the language spoken, these are patterns. The emphasis of the jokes, these are patterns. The paradigms out of which the thoughts are constructed are patterns. You build a different structure of thought within the paradigm of capitalism than within the paradigm of humanism. Humanism focuses on what happens to the human being. Capitalism focuses on what happens to the capital. Right? Once you put on a lens, you see the world through the frame of that lens, and it is a pattern. This is a group of people who have this tone of voice, that emphasize these feelings, that ignore these feelings, that talk about these things in light conversation, that boycott these things. They will never be found in light conversation. That embrace or dissociate from touch. This is a cult in which its members conform, not out of some grand sense of uniqueness and authenticity, but out of the dogmatic copying of the status quo. I eat grasshoppers, says one person, because in my cult they eat grasshoppers. I eat hamburgers, another person says, because that's what we do in my cult. That was considered a treat. This person does it, this person does it, this person does it, so that's what I do. Now, the relative protein or health of grasshoppers or hamburgers is not examined. Medically, you might find more trace minerals, more sustainability, more collaboration with farmers, not needing to use pesticides, etc., with the approach of eating grasshoppers. It's just to a cult member, this is beyond reckoning. I mean, you're not seriously asking me to consider the relative values of doing something different than my cult. It's absurd. This is who we are. So the ego identifies with the cult, defines itself and its identity with the collective pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, where the, quote, uniqueness and variation is how fast you drive your car on the highway. It's a given that you'll drive a car. That your uniqueness and variation is whether you wake up at 5:45 a.m. or 6:45 a.m. in order to go to work that day. It's a given that you'll be going to work if you're a certain age, etc. And so the pattern defines a probability field. Every cult in human history has generated a probability field, and you observe that probability field by taking 100,000 people in the cult. And you see how many suicides per 100,000 people. You see how many lack vitamin D. You see how much depression in 100,000 people. You see how many are hopeful for the future. You see how many are enjoying their work. You see how many people have one person that they love deeply or more. How many people have two people that they love deeply or more, three people love deeply or more, etc. See how many people enjoy waking up in the morning, right? If you ask and measure what matters, every cult produces a probability field, and cults are not created equal. This cult has 25% depression in this context. This cult has 3% depression in this context, right? If you don't want to be depressed, your best strategy may be to unlearn the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being in your cult, and learn the patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being in the cult that has a better statistical probability field in the area you're interested in. If you're feeling suicidal, and you see that your cult has an X percentage of people in your demographic within your cult. In America, middle-aged white people have a high suicide rate relative to many others at the present time, and that rate has been going up. So, if you're a middle-aged American and feeling suicidal, you might want to examine the cults around the world that have a significantly lower suicide rate and learn a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, and then measure your desire to die. Is it going up or down as you transition between one norm, one status quo, one pattern, and another? Now, the 10,000 cults in human history are a mere fraction. We divide the circle into 10,000 times. We get 10,000 cults, each with its own pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. Some cults are highly ecological, others highly pathological. Some cults are strong in masculine strength and warmanship, while others have been matriarchal sources with so much peace they did not require formal leadership or a police force. So every pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being produces a predictable statistical result. And to find out what that result is, we need simply measure 1,000 or more people from that cult. We need merely measure 1,000 or more people from our cult in order to see what our odds are of experiencing well-being or suffering in a given area. Now, the promise, the pledge of any cult, the usefulness of a cult, is how much well-being it generates for how many of its members. An intelligent cult consumes very little energy, time, money, and natural resources in order to generate massive amounts of well-being for the vast majority of its people sustainably, right? So if we look then at a cult, at a culture from a critical angle, if we measure what matters in a cult, one of the first things to measure is the efficiency. The efficiency with which that cult turns energy into sustainable well-being. So what we measure then is, what is the energy consumed? Now, we all have 24 hours in a day, so that's the time. What is the energy consumed? How many dollars are consumed? How much money is consumed by the cult on a daily basis, on a monthly basis? How many natural resources are taken out of their natural environment, out of their ecological formation? For example, a tree is a resource in an ecology that is designed by nature. As we cut down the tree, it enters an ecology that is designed by human beings. Now, nature's been around for 25 billion years, gets bigger every year, more abundant every year, more complex and sustainable every single year for 25 billion years. And it's not just Earth. There are more than 1 trillion life-positive planetary bodies in the known universe, and in many more in the unknown universe. There are more than 1 trillion planets, many of them bigger than ours, that have been around for 25 billion years. And it's safe to say that give nature another 1 trillion years, that everything that has the possibility of giving birth to life will. We've only been around for 25 billion years. Life's just getting started. There's no end in sight. There may be an end for a given sun, a given planet, but not for life. So the efficiency with which energy is converted into sustainable well-being, how many people are brought into a high state of well-being per unit of energy invested, and how much of that well-being is sustainable, meaning that if everyone on the planet today lived that lifestyle, that they could keep living that lifestyle indefinitely, consuming that amount of resources, and the ecology upon which we all depend would continue to produce enough trees, enough fish, enough water, enough this to sustain that protocol. Because a sustainable cult is more intelligent in the long run than a bankrupt cult. You know, a sustainable lifestyle is more intelligent than running up credit card debt, taking out more credit cards in order to pay off that credit card debt, and then going bankrupt and the lifestyle collapsing. It takes more planning, more vision, larger time horizons, more intelligence to design a sustainable cult than an unsustainable cult. So this is the first and perhaps the most important metric of cultural design. if we were to set out to design a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, the entire premise behind such an effort would be to generate more sustainable well-being for the group of people that chose to adopt it than the status quo, than the existing cult. So the first metric. Now, the second thing, if you're going to design a cult, is zero waste. You know, there isn't a single part of the universe that life and nature doesn't have a use for. In the ecology that is the universe, in the ecology that is the solar system, in the ecology that is this planet, if you delete people from the equation and just take them off to the side, figuratively speaking, in your mind, go back a few thousand years, try and find anything that is waste. You go to the ice caps, is that a waste that there are ice caps? Birds, are they a waste product? Water, is it something you'd want to get rid of? What about dirt? Rocks, mountains, the Earth's core? You see, nature doesn't produce energy in a form that it doesn't know what to do with. But human beings have been producing more and more energy in a form that they don't know what to do with. And so to cover the fact that they don't know what to do with it, they dig a big hole in the ground, consuming energy, and bulldoze 100 tons of energy into the ground in a form called garbage, and then pretend that this is a great system. You see, nature doesn't have any garbage, and traditional cults, traditional cultures didn't have any garbage either. Going back 500 years on this very piece of ground in Marin County, California, there's no garbage left by the Hopi Indians. Upon their death, there was nothing left that was not sacred, that did not have a place in the natural landscape. Upon my death, there will be 100 tons of energy in forms created by human beings that human beings don't want, that is buried in the earth under the pretense that it is disgusting and should be gotten away from us. One 200-pound person generates 100 tons of energy in a form that we want to get away, that we want hauled off and removed because we don't know what to do with it. The most intelligent cult or culture knows what to do with every unit of energy in its purview, every person. There are no waste people. There are no waste thoughts. There are no waste feelings. There are no waste products. There is energy in formation in an endless cycle of change. And we have the intelligence to return it to the circle, to return it from the ecology in better condition than the condition we found it. And that is the measure of a cult, of a culture. Nature produces zero waste in its culture, in its ecology. The Native Americans produced zero waste in their ecology. We produce 100 tons of waste per person in our ecology. And that gap between zero waste and the status quo is the gap with which that can be used to measure our divergence from intelligence, our divergence from sustainability, our divergence from success. Because if your culture, if your people is and knows how to be sustainable and leave its environment in a better place, in a better way, in a better situation than it found it, then people become a blessing in the ecology and can continue to grow and grow in a symbiotic, in a synergistic relationship with our host body indefinitely. That's a sign of intelligence. It's also a sign of generosity because it leaves the next generation and the generation after that in a stronger position than we are today. That can also be measured as the efficiency, the effectiveness, the success of a culture. Do we leave our ecology in a stronger position than when we found it? So we have waste, which is a human invention. It doesn't exist. It just means that we've created massive amounts of energy that we don't know what to do with. And in a state of ignorance, we're burying it. So vision and generosity is another metric of a successful culture. Another measure of a culture is its complexity. Is it a very crude cult where everyone goes and works in a shoe factory? There may be musicians, there may be artists, there may be poets, but the only jobs are working in a factory? Or is it a cult that has a wide tapestry of roles and that identifies the unique talents and abilities of each of its people, that identifies the unique abilities of each of its people and creates a sacred dance for each person that blesses, that nourishes, that feeds both the tribe, the cult, and the ecology? Is there complexity in roles that corresponds with the complexity in nature? Because nature, in its ongoing path of evolution, creates mutation every time it reproduces anything. A dandelion seed, a single dandelion plant, produces 5 dandelion seeds. Each one sends out hundreds of individual seeds. And as those seeds go off following the chaos of the winds, within those hundreds and hundreds of seeds, at least 5% of them are different, are life's experiments in diversity and complexity. This seed maybe can survive a little better in the desert. This seed can survive maybe a little better in the swamp. And if the seed that can survive best in a swamp lands in a swamp, then that ancestry, that lineage of evolution continues as a successful mutation in a new minority distinct pattern of energy. And if that seed that does better in the drought than its ancestors lands in a desert and takes off, and then produces more seeds, some of which do better in the desert and take off, soon that lineage will create more complex life in the desert and learn to live. Every generation of people is born with a wide variety of predispositions that are complex. Now, in simple, crude monoculture environments, the minorities are starved and killed off. The minorities are neglected and ignored. And only the status quo has room for the norm. But in complex and diverse cults, the 5 to 20% in any given generation that are unique, that have unusual abilities and predispositions, are exposed to a rich terrain, a rich ecology within the culture. And a Mozart is discovered because there is a symphony to discover him. And a Marie Curie is discovered because there's a scientific community that she can learn about and apply her gifts in. And a Thomas Edison is discovered to have a particular talent with practical things, and capital is allocated to make his genius bless the entire culture. And a great swimmer has a place in the Olympics. And a great violinist has a band that they can join and a platform to play their instrument. And a painter is given walls to perfect their art. In a great culture, it is complex enough for the unique predispositions in its minorities to be discovered, nurtured, and to be harnessed as a blessing, as rich food for their culture. In monocultures, all of the minorities, all of the divergence, all of the mutation is killed off. We want millions and millions and millions of drones. And if you don't fit in, we'll cut off the bits that don't fit. And if you get sick and die or fall behind after the injuries, psychic, emotional, physical, we'll discard you because we are not intelligent enough to accommodate diversity. We're not intelligent enough to understand the blessing that you hold that requires more thought to figure out. So we just throw you on the side heap. Like the 100 tons of waste we don't know what to do with, and so we bury in a big hole. Or the millions of thoughts we don't want to think, so we tune out. Or the feelings that we bury with alcohol because we don't know what to do with them either. We put our minorities, our diversity, and our mutations in a big hole in the ground and bury it. And we call the place we bury the energy we don't know what to do with a dump. And we call the void, the psychic void, where we put the people we are too stupid to integrate and be blessed by, and call them losers. A fish is a loser as soon as you take it out of the water and act as if it should perform a factory job. A bird is a loser if you ask it to win a race and then shout at it because it came in last. A mathematical genius is a loser if you put them on the football field and laugh when they fall down, knocked over by people who are competent athletes, people who have a genius for motion in their body and for strength. Life, nature has produced diversity for billions of years. That's not new. What is new are monocultures in agriculture and Western thought that expect people to narrow their probability field into a tight pattern of making money in menial jobs and spending money on a monocrop of standardized goods, only to repeat and repeat and repeat for as long as their psychic and physical bodies can stand the monotony of such a cult. On the continuum of intelligence, on the continuum of success, the cult that can do something useful, that can find the blessing in every one of the unique gifts and skills of its people, is the more intelligent cult. The cults that marginalize, shame, and sideline large percentages of their people are the stupid ones, are the ones that lack the imagination in cultural design to imagine that that plastic bag being thrown out could be useful for something intelligent. That violinist that daydreams on the sewing floor of the factory could be playing music that uplifts the entire factory, making them more productive than any of the sewers in the sweatshop. But that would take imagination. That would take intelligence to comprehend, to experiment, to iterate, to find out. And the stupidity of the narrow cult is self-referential, having defined its narrow lines as good, 99.9% that is outside the box is eliminated for no other reason than it's outside the lines. And it's too much thought to consider. Another measure of the intelligence of a cult, of a culture, is the brain that it nurtures within the human brain. So a human being can be traumatically regressed to a reptilian state that is sociopathic, with a admittedly very sophisticated reptilian brain, a pattern analyzing brain that allows a more efficient exercise of the reptilian protocols. You know, in Nazi Germany, the efficiency with which an entire race was hunted down and exterminated was far more efficient than an animal could hunt its prey. When you reduce a human being to a reptilian state through trauma, you pair one of the smartest future predicting, inventing brains that is neutral. The rational brain is a servant to motivation. It is neutral. It can help you do things more efficiently. It can help you predict the future. It can help you see patterns. When you pair that brain with a reptile, you get one of the most dangerous bodies on the planet. Now, within the exact same area of human consciousness, we have the reptilian brain, we have the instinctive limbic brain, we have the rational brain, we have the empathic brain. This is the human brain. This is what makes us human. We care about other people. That's the empathic brain. And we have the transcendent brain, the brain capable of having ecstatic experiences so profound they remind us of our innate connection with the earth and with all living things. The transcendent brain, the God-Goddess brain, that reminds us that we are a small piece of the entire ecological whole and everything is related. There is meaning, purpose, and value in every piece of dust. But it is the transcendent brain, when we enter the transcendent state, that allows us to see that. An intelligent culture heals and responds to the disease of its traumatized victims and children. It preempts childhood abuse, bullying, shaming, and violence. It preempts it so that a child can become human, so that a child is not caught in the reptilian protocol of surviving a reptilian world. The reptilian brain will always predominate in a sociopathic cult. If a child is exposed primarily to a reptile in the form of a traumatized parent who doesn't know what love is, the reptilian state is contagious and corresponds to a reptilian world. Fight, flight, freeze, and ass-licking are the protocols that allow a reptile to stay alive in a reptilian world. We reduce every human being to a reptilian state when we regress them into the reptilian brain through repeated trauma and a lack of protection for their innocence. Children are born innocent. And through traumas within the wound, within the generational line of the family, within the cultural lineage of abuse and violation of other cultures, and being overwhelmed with energies too fast to respond to sexually, physically, psychologically, with no attempt to repair. We can regress a percentage of the people, as all cults do, to a sociopathic state. But the measure of intelligence is how successfully does a cult identify its traumatized victims, and liberate them from the reptilian brain with empathy, safety, and healing. And how many people does it throw to the dragon? When you take your innocents and put them out on the rock and leave them for the dragon, it is synonymous with asking the most vulnerable and innocent members of the cult, infants and children and young women, to take the brunt of stupidity, ignorance, and brutality from the majority and those who are the giants and the strong ones in physical form, without protection, and then shame them for the grief as their humanity is murdered step by step in our neighborhoods without protest. Sociopathic cults produce sociopaths who spread the virus of the reptilian brain through the remaining population. The most intelligent cult does not have reptiles in its midst because the most intelligent cult doesn't traumatize its people and shame them for the symptoms of trauma. An intelligent cult doesn't give its veterans PTSD, kick them out on the street when they can't hold down a job under the grief and addictions they use to manage the pain, and then shame them for being homeless. An intelligent cult carries the shame of its own ignorance, the remorse of its own stupidity and cruelty, and seeks to right the wrong, to balance the scales, so that the strongest and the most powerful members of the cult take the brunt and protect those that are most vulnerable, those that are the youngest, those that are the smallest, those that are the most sensitive. So there's a good recipe for a healthy cult. Now, another metric for cult design is how consciously can any member of the cult connect the protocol of the cult with the well-being it is intended to generate, number one. And number two, value the well-being it was intended to generate more than the protocol that was intended to facilitate it. In the United States, we talk about being a cult of law. We're a cult of law. We're not a cult of well-being, though. If the, quote, impartial application of the law destroys a family, then the family has to be destroyed. What's a mere family compared to the dogma of a law? If a race is marginalized systematically by a barrage of racist laws, and an entire race is systematically dehumanized, well, it's the law. You see, stupid people think that laws are more important than the well-being they were intended if it's an empathic and intelligent culture to facilitate. Now, laws that are generated by sociopaths for the specific purpose of causing the maximum amount of cruelty and suffering to another human being why don't you just cut their head off and stop pretending the nobility of law? If your existence is founded on the need to demean another human being, and you don't feel like a man or a woman without destroying another people's life, then get out your gun and get shooting. Don't pretend there's something noble about laws that systematically marginalize people sexually, religiously, of different races, and leave them with fewer and fewer resources to live a free and meaningful life. There's no difference between getting out a machine gun and mowing down 1,000 people and passing a law against homosexuality that leads to 1,000 suicides and the misery of everyone else that remains. If you hate men who love themselves and each other so much that you want to kill them, then have the decency to get out a gun, and if you're too cowardly to fight on equal terms, then mow them down like a coward and confront yourself and your cruelty. Don't pass a law for the betterment of all that leads to 1,000 suicides and pretend that you wish that they could simply despise themselves enough to change their nature, born out of life's design, into your stupidity and your narrow box. Just admit you can't stand life's diversity. You're so threatened by life's abundant chaos that anything that doesn't look like you want to kill off. Life is not on your side. Every generation has more and more diversity in every dandelion seed, in every poplar tree, in every culture, in every family. There will be a rich terrain of personality, or in the mediocrity of sameness, it will become boring, and the genetic heritage of those with more complexity and diversity will succeed in the world. And your strain of dogma will die out the way all energy patterns in the universe die out that will not change in response to life. Life is moving forward. The dogmatic cults, religious or otherwise, that refuse to adapt will be killed off by more efficient forms of life, because that's life's design. That's how life got from the size of a pea 25 billion years ago, with less than a second. You see, when life first began, the entirety of time was less than a second, and the entirety of space was less than a pea. And all the peoples that have ever been and will ever be existed as a possibility field within this speck. And life's protocol of creating so much with so little has been diversity, has been abundance, has been mutation, has been the wonderful experiment of the universe to see what works and what doesn't work. And everyone that tries to kill off vast segments of the possibility field to make them comfortable in a status quo is using their freedom to fight the most successful program that has ever been, the program of endless and abundant life through experimentation and diversity and creativity, year after year after year. And long after your stupidity has died off in 1,000 years, the endless mutation of life's pattern will see diversity blossom, and expand as it always has. When we fight the world, we gain nothing but a wasted life, lived in the fear of stepping across the lines of our own dogma and delusions. And in an intelligent cult, you don't have to tell kids because I said so. Shut up because I said so. Do it because I said so. Because the meaning of why we're doing this. Why do I have to go to school? I'm not learning anything that I need in my later life. You have to go to school because that's what we do. After you go to school, then you can start thinking. Then you can start learning things useful, like learning to drive and starting a business and painting and all the things that would make life rich and meaningful. But for now, you're going to do it because I said so. And there isn't a good justification for why you're learning algebra but not learning about a rich and healthy sexuality. Why you're learning the history of bridges, but you're not learning how to start a company. And in an intelligent culture that is data-based, that is effective at bringing well-being and getting better every year, there's no need for everyone to ask the same questions. The experiments, the scientific, sociological work can be studied and shared with children as an incentive to learn to read. You want to know why we do this? Read all about it. It's here. This is our lineage of data, of science, of transparency. Here's why we switched to doing this subject instead of this subject in 1587. And then here's where we updated it in 1856. And if you think we're due for an update, submit your mathematics here. Why do you think we could get more efficient well-being out of this and this? And let's have competent people evaluate it in real time in a direct democracy founded on competence. Next measure of a successful and an efficient culture. How many minutes of every day do each of the people in the cult contribute actively to their own and other people's well-being? In other words, if you take cult number A, and 75% of the people in cult number A are doing things they don't want to be doing, and the impact that they have on other people is neutral or not good, then you have an incredibly inefficient cult. But if in cult B, 92% of the minutes of every day for the average member of that cult is meaningful for that cult member themselves, and 75% of the impact they have on other people as they go about their life would be rated by those other people to be positive, meaning their life is enriched because you exist. A cult that enriches itself with its own existence is more intelligent than a cult that torments itself with its unavoidable altercations. What percentage of a people are considered garbage or otherwise known as prisoners, where you're spending, in the US's case, $100,000 a year to disrupt a family, to not only take away their tax revenue, and not only in many cases break up a family, but then wasting the lives of wardens and guards who are not contributing any value in order to stand guard over people at $100,000 per person per year who are precluded from offering any value. Even in the case of sociopathic harm, where the goal would be justice, having the punishment, first of all, be transmuted into amelioration, where the perpetrator and the victim are required to dialogue until the victim has a remedy that balances out the harm of the crime, of the abuse, of the violation. And the victim is set up to be helped in the way they want to be helped. And the perpetrator regains their freedom once they've paid that debt directly or indirectly, and works on that. This is a far more intelligent culture than asking the victim to pay higher taxes to pay for the imprisonment of the person behind bars who can do nothing to balance the crime. How much R&D is spent in cultural design? Cultural design accounts for most of the statistics of well-being in a country and a culture. So every nuance of norm that is changed for the better improves the well-being for the entire culture. It becomes a new norm. How much science and intelligence is invested on a yearly basis to upgrade the culture to the latest technology, psychologically, relationally, ecologically, financially? I don't have a single place in the United States to contribute an idea for cultural change, or for that idea to be voted on. And there's no group of experts that would evaluate the science of the idea. There's no budget in the national economy for cultural upgrades. That is one of the biggest blind spots and stupidities imaginable, considering that every cult is incredibly inefficient and behind the times. So a cult that acknowledges that it's going to lag and has a protocol for updating and evolution is a far more intelligent cult than one that just waits for a revolution or a civil war to prompt some crude, spontaneous change. Finally, a cult that is data-based, that gathers metadata of all of its people, ranks what's going on in terms of the most sustainable well-being that can be created and where it exists in the pockets of the population, and the most chronic and unnecessary and intense suffering where it exists, and responds to both, spreading the well-being and learning from those with the opportunity and skill to embody it, and responding to the biggest sources of its pain inside its boundaries. That is updated monthly for free in a data-based app. Now, this is the first talk I've ever heard about the objective evaluation of how you could take any of the 10,000 cults in human history and objectively analyze how much well-being, how much life, how much value did they bring to their people, with what cost, where you measure the value and the cost. And then stack that up and learn which cultures have done what in what areas. Because among the 10,000 cults in human history, many of them did a far better job of dancing than we do. Many of them had a stronger sense of meaning than we have. Many of them did a better job of processing and digesting and living in intense feelings than our cult. But the problem with dogmatic, self-referential cults that depend on the law of mass, military might, to dominate the minority cults, is that self-referential cults define success on their own terms. If you define your cult and its success based on its ability to dominate and kill more people than any other people around the cult ecosphere, our cult can kill more people than your cult can, so it's better. Why? Because we said so, and because it's true. See, we make up the law that says that cults that can kill more cults are better than cults that can't. And having made up that law, we then kill a lot of people to make sure that it's clear we climb the ladder on that continuum. And then we're on the top, we define that as success. That's a far more ignorant approach than understanding that the ability to defend or be aggressive on the world stage is one of many paths towards well-being, and not the best. Meaning, if you go to a war with another cult that has 50 million people, and you each lose 10, 20 million people, but you killed more people theirs and none of you are going to feel particularly happy. You're certainly going to feel happier that you won rather than you lost, but it's not as intelligent as avoiding the conflict in the first place, which would suggest that emotional literacy and relational literacy and learning the art of negotiation would be far better to teach in school than the need to kill the bad guys and spend larger and larger budgets of the national economy on energy patterns that have no purpose other than to kill other people and destroy the shared environment that we all depend on.